Welcome to Andy Staples on 3. As the title suggests, the spring transfer portal window did not destroy America, as was breathlessly predicted in other places. We might have made some breathless predictions too, probably in January, probably coming off that first transfer portal window. We might have said spring could get a little bit wild. And then as we got closer to it, it became apparent, maybe not. And there's some reasons for that. Probably your high school economics class explained it best, as markets just tend to figure themselves out as time goes by. And that's really what happened is for the most part, the players that the schools wanted to keep got locked down in that winter window. The players either decided they were leaving or got the deal they wanted and stayed. And that was pretty much it. Now, there were a couple cases where somebody bounced around again. We're going to talk to Pete Nakos very, very shortly. And we've got a couple guys, one guy who boomeranged, and then another guy who has transferred and now is on the market again, looking for a different school. And that's happening, but it's rare. But we'll talk about which schools came out on top, which schools did not get what they wanted in that spring transfer portal. Plus, we're going to talk to Pete about the next thing, the next big thing, as he transitions from keeping track of all these folks in the transfer portal. They're about done. Now he's got to keep track of what is college football and by extension, all of college sports going to look like in the next couple of years, because there's some stuff happening very fast and a lot of people trying to figure out what to do, and it will make big changes. But what's crazy is we still don't know exactly how that's going to look. So we got that. Plus, of course, booty, rocking in the transfer portal. That's right. General Booty's still in the portal. So we'll get an update on that. Before we get to Pete, though, I do want to give a shout out to one of our regular listeners in the podcast version, Brad Register, former Georgia Bulldog, who sent me a great picture, because I did open the show the other day with booty rocking in the transfer portal. A great picture of a bunch of former Bulldogs and Bubba Sparks partying before Georgia played Alabama in the national title game in Indianapolis a few years ago. For those who don't know, Bubba Sparks obviously is a Georgia guy, but he was friends with one of the 90s era Georgia defensive linemen, and so was very much in the social circles of a lot of mid-90s Georgia linemen. And so this picture, I don't think I'm talking out of school. This guy's talked about this thing a lot. Matt Stinchcomb, College Football Hall of Famer, great human being, incredible impressionist. He's in the photo. Brad's in the photo. It's awesome. There's Bubba Sparks. I've been introducing the classics to my 14-year-old. Miss New Booty and Ugly, we've definitely covered in our classes on the classics. So if you are confused, and I don't think you would be, but because we all appreciate the classics on this show, but if you're confused about why I keep saying booty, rocking in the transfer portal, well, go listen to Miss New Booty. Because if you don't know Bubba Sparks and the Yin Yang Twins, what are you even doing? What are you doing? A man who definitely knows Bubba Sparks and the Yin Yang Twins, probably personally, because he knows everybody. Pete Nakos joins us now. What's up, Pete? I think Pete's muted. Uh-oh. Don't worry. We got Pete. He's coming back. He will be with us. What happens with General Booty? Because I know you're all waiting with bated breath. We're also going to talk about winners, losers in the transfer portal. I don't know if anybody really lost, but we'll find out. Hi, Pete. Still no Pete. Huh. Wonder what happened. This is the joy of the live show and the curse of the live show. But here's the deal. When we evaluate the transfer portal, the spring window especially, it's hard to say this school didn't get what they wanted. This school, because like we said, what you wanted probably wasn't necessarily available. in the spring. There was a very limited supply of the things everybody needed, which would be defensive linemen, offensive linemen. So, like we talked about Dominic Williams committing to Oklahoma the other day. Well, everybody wanted him. We're going to talk to Billy Embody later in the show from the Bengal Tiger. That's on 3's LSU site. LSU wanted him too. LSU's wanted most of the guys with starting experience, D linemen in the portal, and they didn't get him. He went to Oklahoma. Texas also wanted it. It's just the competition was pretty fierce for this stuff. So that's where a lot of these schools are at, and they're still looking, and there's still guys in the portal. Pete, let's try again. What's up?
I'm here. What's up, man?
Yes. Woo.
What's up, man?
How are we doing?
I'm good. I love that intro like 2 minutes ago when my mic didn't work.
So. It was fantastic. We were gonna have you rap. Yeah. We're gonna give you have you do the first few bars of "Ugly," which I'm sure you know Bubba Sparks' first hit by heart, but it's okay. It's all right. We got to talk this portal because you and I talked about this before it opened. That it probably wasn't going to be massive supply. It turned into a really good seller's market. Yeah. If you were a D lineman or an O lineman with some Power 5 starting experience. Totally. And is that like Dominic Williams, those types of players, are those the guys who truly won the spring transfer portal?
Yeah, the defensive tackles won the spring transfer portal, and there's still a few out there who are completely like, dominating the market at this point. But you look at it, right, like Simeon Barrow, Derek Harmon, Dominic Williams are all big names that have come off the board. And then you look at who's left. There's the Kent State defensive tackle, CJ West. And then there's also, wrote about him real quick yesterday, the Wyoming nose tackle, Gavin Meyer, who's from Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. Has I believe 69 career tackles as a grad transfer. And really for some of these programs who've missed on the Barrows and the Williams, I mean, he provides a pretty viable 1-year stopgap. If you need a guy to kind of just jump in and make an impact right away.
Yeah, and that's what people are looking for. We'll talk to Billy Embody later, because LSU's certainly still in that market where if you are a big body, they need some depth on the defensive line. And that's really what we're talking about now. I'm trying to think of the teams that came out maybe a little bit. Peyton Woodyard, who's an Alabama DB, jumped into the portal. He's going to go to Oregon. It seems like Oregon really kind of got everything they want. If we combine the winter portal and the spring portal, that they really did kind of address the needs they needed to address.
I'd say Oregon's the biggest winner of the spring and winter window combined. And the reason why I would say that is because they knew they needed a quarterback. They got Dylan Gabriel, probably one of the top 3 available in the winter. And then, I mean, Dan Lanning has continued to recruit at Oregon at a really high level. So when you pair probably one of the better portal classes with a roster filled with 4 and 5 stars, I mean, Oregon has so much depth heading into 2024. And I think that this season, as you and I have talked about so much already, is really going to show what roster construction is going to look like in the future because of the 12-team playoff and what it takes to make a run.
Yeah, and I'm so curious about Oregon. We talked to Justin Hopkins last week because it felt like they've kind of been building to this. They probably had the best roster in the Pac-12 the last 2 seasons, did not win it. Now they go into the Big Ten where Ohio State's got the best roster. Let's be real about this. And then obviously Michigan's is very good. But Oregon does look like they can compete. And like you said, it is a good mixture. Like their offensive tackles. You've got Josh Connerly, who was Dan Lanning's first big out of high school recruiting win when he got hired. And then you've got a Johnny Cornelius, who's kind of the classic transfer portal story of he was at Rhode Island, blew up. Yep. Now he's played a season at Oregon. He's got that experience under his belt too, and he's clearly an NFL guy. So yeah, I can't wait to see what that roster looks like against the Ohio States and the Michigans.
Yeah, no, it's going to be exciting. Other teams, so I think have done a really good job in the spring and winter combined would probably be Ohio State. I think Texas has done a really good job. Right, they get some quarterbacks and defensive tackles they needed, and also retooled the wide receiver room in the winter. I think Kalen DeBoer has done a really nice job of keeping that roster together. I know there's some really big pieces who left, but at the same time, they still have a pretty solid roster that is going to be able to compete in the fall. There's a few others too, but those are a few of the ones that kind of like jump to the top of my mind right away.
Yeah, Ryan in the chat. So we had Peyton Woodyard for one spring. Yeah, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that. I mean, guys who and I think it reminds me of Brew McCoy, who Tennessee fans are well aware of, the receiver at Tennessee now. But it reminds me of when he initially was going to go to Texas. He was committed to USC, then he signed with Texas. He goes to Texas for spring. He's like, I'm going back home to LA, going to USC. Now you can do that and you don't have to sit out a year.
Yeah.
And we've seen, so Peyton, he's a West Coast guy, right? And
he's from Bellflower. Yeah.
Yeah. From California.
Yeah.
So, he's headed back to the West Coast. You saw, I'm blank Jason, and I'm going to butcher his last name, but he was at USC for the spring. Yeah. And he's from Florida, is coming back to play at Florida. So you've seen a few of those this spring too.
Yeah, I mean, what history shows us is the portal is always a great time for guys who want to get closer to home. I mean, Brian Kelly did that in his first year at LSU. You look at his portal haul like 2 years ago, and it was a bunch of Louisiana natives. So I think that's one way to look at it. I guess the other thing too, Andy, that really pops out about this, was talking to someone about it yesterday, and I know we've talked about it before, but I want to bring it up again. Like, I think until we're going to talk about this later, but until we get into like the next era of college sports, we're definitely going to have a winter and spring window. And I think the spring window will continue to be this interesting time where maybe not the most talent jumps in, but you also have some surprises who have realized that they can leverage their market value in the spring much better than they can in the winter when there's a rush.
Yeah, and I think it's like for the players who have smart advisors, and advisor can mean a lot of things in this day and age, but some of them have just pure agents, guys who also represent NFL players. Some of them still, have somebody from back home who helps, or maybe it's even one of their parents, or maybe it's their high school coach doing the helping. But I would say, like, if you are an all conference group of 5 lineman, you should not enter the transfer portal in the winter. You should wait. Not only should you not enter in the winter, you shouldn't even enter at the beginning of the spring. You should wait until kind of the middle of the spring and then pop in. And then it's just feeding frenzy. Like, you're going to get overpaid.
I mean, last Monday, that would have been like perfect. But on the flip side of that, like, if we're not advisors here, but I do want to say, like, if you're a starting quarterback looking for a new home, or like, even if you're a backup trying to find a starting job, you got to go in the winter. Like,
yes,
like,
quarterback's a different animal.
Yeah, like there's a lot of good backups in right now, but odds are they're all going to go land in other backup jobs because all those starting jobs are locked up.
John in the chat says, Andy, after yesterday, I think we should refer to anything bad that happens this season as Mariah Carey ass. Pete, you probably missed most of me and Philip Duke's discussion of Deion. We had a commenter call Colorado's defense Mariah Carey ass. We can't figure out why that's bad, but that may be a new term.
That was on a great show, by the way. I did watch that. Yeah.
Duke's, it was tremendous. Yeah. It was tremendous. But we're going to see what happens. I don't want to go to the Deion well too often, but I do feel like when there's stuff to be said, we can talk about it. But let's talk about Colorado, actually, because this is germane to this discussion, because Colorado's been very active in the transfer portal since Deion got there as the head coach. They were making changes. Dylan Edwards, the running back leaving, who went to Kansas State, I would say is probably the only guy they lost in this cycle that they really wanted to keep. But
I'd have to agree with that. Yeah.
Who'd they bring in who can actually help them right now?
I like the addition of, I think they did a good job in the running back room. I really like the addition of Dallin Hayden, the Ohio State tailback. And then you also brought in Rashad Amos, who was at Miami of Ohio and rushed for over 1,000 yards and was committed to Mississippi State before Colorado. Other guys who really jump out, I think the addition of Peyton Kirkland, the Texas offensive tackle, gives them another young lineman who has a lot of upside. Other guys I look at, they added some, you could argue, maybe underrated defensive tackles. They brought in the Ohio defensive tackle, Ray Buell, who had an outstanding 2023. We'll have to see how he meshes in the Big 12, but that's one that pops out. I think they did the right things on the defensive side of the ball, Andy, and now I guess we just have to wait and see how it all plays out. But the offense has all the tools it needs to be really good.
Except maybe the line. We'll see.
Well, yeah,
like, they're starting left tackle into the portal, but again, that was not one I was that worried about, because that was my assumption was Jordan Seaton has been as advertised, the true freshman who is the highest rated offensive lineman in the class of 24. Like, my assumption was he's been as advertised, he's plugging into that spot, so it made sense. But that's the only thing I worry about. And like you mentioned, the one from Texas coming in with 4 years of eligibility, like that's the one thing, because my thing with Dion is it doesn't feel like they're trying to develop anybody. It feels like they're just churning them through in terms of the backups. But if you're going to take somebody like that and you do want to develop him, like that could pay big dividends in a couple of years.
They also brought in the Clemson offensive tackle, Zachariah Owens, who was a 4-star and I believe a freshman. Let me check real quick. Yeah, he was.
Yeah, he was a redshirt freshman. So he's got 4 years.
Another guy, 6'5", I think. 385. I mean, another guy who was a ton of upside. And how does the development go? I mean, how does everything go? I know Dion has shot down all the rumors this spring that he's only going to be around for Shador and Travis and Shiloh and then leave. But this is going to be the true test of, can he develop an offensive line?
Yeah. And if they can, then it's a different story. Phil Lodehold is their offensive line coach now, former great Oklahoma Sooner, and kind of studied at the foot of Bill Bedenbaugh the last few years, helping him at Oklahoma. So yeah, there's a chance that works out. It's just, we got to see it, because what concerned me was basically everybody they brought in last year who was a backup, they were like, flush.
Yeah.
Here, we're getting a whole new set of backups now. And that makes you worry about, okay, how's your depth? Have you tried to have any continuity? We'll see. Again, with Colorado, we need to see it on the field, and we won't know until the season starts. But Miami's another one that I feel like did, from a personnel standpoint, plug the spots it wanted to plug. I think Damian Martinez, the running back coming from Oregon State, might be the highest impact transfer they wind up having.
I don't know.
Other than Kim Ward from Washington. I mean, I'm talking about this spring window.
No. I'm saying, I don't know. We'll have to see where Tyler Barron goes. I mean,
that's the other one I want to ask you about. Yeah.
He was at USC this weekend. He's been to Miami. Ole Miss has continued to talk to him. I'm not saying anything's a done deal anywhere, but I think Miami's definitely still in the mix. And you talk about a guy who, I mean, I think he's the number 2 available player on the board right now for the On3 industry ranking. And I think Tyler Barron brings a lot to the table. And I mean, when he's on, he's on.
Yeah. He was the edge rusher opposite James Pierce at Tennessee last year.
Yeah.
Transferred to Ole Miss. Now he's in the portal again. Like you said, Ole Miss is not out of it yet, but could wind up somewhere else. Yeah. The Miami thing is very interesting, because if he, let's say he's on and you put him opposite Reuben Bain, because Reuben Bain could be the guy we're talking about the way we talk about James Pierce now.
Yeah.
So, and that's the thing about Miami that I find interesting, because all the things we just said about Colorado, where it's like, okay, who are you developing? It does feel like Miami has developed some of those homegrown guys.
Yeah.
We're going to see Samson Okonola move into a starting role on the offensive line. We saw Francis Mauigoa start all last year. Reuben Bain, obviously, is the guy they recruited who was awesome right off the bat. So that's one where you just, again, prove it on the field, but it does feel like you have the pieces in place. It's funny because Miami is sort of like a step behind developmentally Oregon, which is where Mario Cristobal came from. Funny how that works.
Yeah. You know who another homegrown guy is who will probably become Ward's top target is Xavier Restrepo.
Yeah.
I mean, he could have a really big season, and you bring Sam Brown in, another option too, makes it a little tougher for secondaries to try to defend. And Cam Ward's gonna have plenty of targets, so it should be fun to watch.
Well, we got to talk about a boomerang too. I love when we have a boomerang. Philip Dukes, our colleague, add-on 3 is the one who came up with this term, boomerang transfer, for somebody who leaves a school and then comes back to that school. Amorion Walker from Michigan is your latest boomerang transfer. He's tweeted twice in the last 4 months. One to say he committed to Ole Miss in January, and then one this past weekend saying he's back.
Yep. Big pickup for Michigan. He transferred to Ole Miss as like a cornerback, I believe. But when he was at Michigan, he was also seeing time as a wide receiver. It's unclear at the moment which position he's going to play. But either way, I think there's a need at cornerback at Michigan right now. And there's a need at wide receiver too. So a guy who can do both is probably going to get some playing time and definitely be used this fall.
I feel like Travis Hunter has inspired a new generation of two-way players, because you're hearing about that a lot more of guys that are coming in, and maybe they're one, maybe they're both, but maybe you play them both.
Yeah. I mean, Memphis was trying to pitch. I'm not sure how active that is now, but they're willing to tell Cormani McClain, hey, if you want to play wide receiver, we'll let you.
Well, and look, why not? If you have ball skills, if you're the type of corner that we're talking about, the 6'1" rangy guy, and you have ball skills, you can definitely help at receiver too. And plus you understand what the guys defending you are trying to do, because that's what you've been playing. So yeah, I definitely think it's hard to do what Travis Hunter was doing, where you're playing every snap. But in certain packages, why not? I mean, if you've got the person and the athleticism, just give the other team something else to think about.
And he clearly has a knack for finding the ball, right? I mean, I believe he led Colorado in interceptions, or he was up there. And then, he's a great wide receiver too. So maybe we'll see more of it this season. It would be something to monitor for sure.
Yeah, I always like that. That's a little. I mean, look, that's what won Charles Woodson the Heisman.
Yeah,
that the playing the receiver, the returning of the kicks, and all that. But it is going to be fun. We didn't see as much hand wringing over the Amorion Walker boomerang as we did over Caden Proctor. I did find that funny, Pete. Like a lot of you'd see criticism of Caden Proctor going back to Alabama. I'm like, wait a second, aren't you the same people who said the grass isn't always greener? Should we be celebrating someone for realizing that?
Yeah. I don't know. Like, everyone's like, oh, he shouldn't be able to. It's like, these are the rules. Caden Proctor's taking advantage of the rules. There's nothing wrong with that. At all. And, good for Caden Proctor for not dragging it out more almost. Like, he realized that.
Yeah, it was kind of a no BS, like, okay, this didn't work, I'm going back. Yeah, it could have been a lot more dramatic.
I mean, we could still be covering where he was going right now, but I mean, he basically was like, okay, I'm going in the portal and I'm going back to Alabama. And it was, we knew what was happening. It was all predicated, but we knew on day one of the portal, he was going in and he was going to go to Alabama.
Well, Catherine in the chat, you underestimate the people's dislike of Alabama, Andy. That's spot on. If he had been going from South Carolina back to Iowa, back to South Carolina, we don't have that discussion. It's not, how dare you? It is Catherine's right. It is more people going, oh crap, Alabama's got another good player again.
Yeah. No, that's a good point, Catherine.
One more transfer portal update, because the people demand it, before we move on to our next topic of conversation. What is the latest on General Axel Booty?
All right, so here's is it the Booty Listish?
Booty Listish, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Booty Listish.
So I talked to, exchanged some texts with General Booty on Friday, and he did confirm that he's talked to Iowa. He's working on lining up some visits for this weekend, from my understanding. But I also think we have to note here that I was also going after other portal quarterbacks. So by no means is it like a done deal. The Hawkeyes are hosting Northwestern quarterback Brendan Sullivan on campus today.
And Brendan Sullivan was probably going to be a Northwestern starter.
Yeah,
maybe.
So I guess we'll have to see how it all goes. The truth.
CJ West update.
I've heard a lot about Wisconsin. I mean, Indiana and Rutgers, excuse me, but don't have any like updates as of this week. I think that CJ West is a guy who hasn't made a decision. There's a lot of market need for him, so it won't surprise me if he ends up like somewhere that wasn't really on our radar.
Katie in the chat: if Proctor took NIL and then left, he should be sued to recover it. That's all been covered. He had a leased truck that he gave back. Like,
and he made less than 6 figures from a business that he did endorsement work for.
Yeah. So you can't sue somebody who did the work you contracted them to do. I mean, you can sue anybody, but then that's not going to win. That's not going to be a winner. Speaking of suing and lawsuits and all that jazz, look at that transition.
I know.
That is a smooth transition right there. Everybody's trying to settle the House versus the NCAA case. It is scheduled to go to trial in January. The thought is a settlement needs to be reached at some point here in the next few months. Part of that settlement could be a new structure for revenue sharing with the athletes. Pete, you wrote a story on Monday about how one of the leading athlete advocacy groups, which, let's be completely transparent here, this is one of the groups that hopes to become the union, essentially, has said that they would support even congressional action to allow the athletes to collectively bargain, even if they're not employees. And this feels like a pretty big concession to the schools, or a willingness to compromise. We've seen it with some Jim Cavalli, who's got another similar organization, said the same thing last year. Jack Swarbrick, the former Notre Dame AD, said this is a potential path last year. What is the latest on that, and how, what are the steps to that becoming possible?
I had some interesting phone calls yesterday, and I think the biggest takeaway we need to have from the association, the College Football Players Association backing that, isn't that it's like some new novel idea. It's just another association who wants to rep athletes, who has backed this framework, which would be for athletes to earn a share of revenue without being employments, but with other assurances that would be as close to employment, but without having employment. And this is going to have to go through Congress, just because of how unique the framework would be. No secrets here, though. Congress hasn't done anything to help college sports in recent years. We could also see a collective bargaining model come about, and I think how that would really take shape is if there's a settlement in House versus the NCAA. There's some leaders who believe there's going to be this 6-month time span where the judge needs to ratify the settlement, and we could see a full-blown battle between players' associations to be the union. Because let's be clear, and we're only talking about college football at this point, there's not going to be multiple unions, right? Like, there's not multiple NFLPAs. There's just going to be one College Football Players Association. So there's athletes.org. There's the association that backed this idea yesterday, the College Football Players Association. There's a few others as well. And I mean, I don't know this for a fact, Andy, but I'm willing to bet that we're going to see a couple more try to take shape in the next, 2 to 4 months.
And we've seen existing unions put money into this, where they are trying to, because they want the college players to be part of their umbrella organization. So it is, there's money as usual. There's money in this, and so people are circling around it. Yeah,
plenty of money. I mean, we're talking about 20 million in revenue share per year at the moment.
And that number goes up as the years go by. And that's the thing. Because I've had people ask me, and I talked to some people, in the business yesterday about this. They say, why would they not want to be employees? Well, one, the schools don't want them to be employees. That's very clear. The schools, and here's why. Like, when you have an employee, you have workers' compensation. You have to put them into the retirement system. All of the benefits that go with an employee. There's a lot of back end cost to that. And if you are the union and you're looking at it from a purely revenue sharing standpoint, you can tell those people, we can increase the revenue share percentage and you still save money because you're not paying all that back end if they're employees.
And the other thing to mention when we talk about the employee talk, like I've talked to athletes about this. I have not talked to every college athlete, but I've talked to enough athletes where like I don't think being an employee is something that they really want to check off during their college career. Like I talked to one athlete who's had a lot of NIL success, and I think they were a little confused about what employment would look like. And they're like, oh, like having a job at like the local Starbucks. When I was like, no, like being in it. She's like, oh, I've never thought about that. It's like, yeah, it's a concept that I don't think a lot of people can wrap their head around. And I don't know if it would work with the way college athletics, just like the amount of time people give and things like that.
Yeah. And what's interesting is the gig economy is so big now and people are so familiar with that concept that being a contractor, I don't think is going to be that confusing for people if that's how it works out. Now, it may not, because you've got these cases before the National Labor Relations Board, and they may just simply say, look, they're employees. With it just common sense tells you they're employees. But if they say they would prefer not to be, then perhaps there's a way to do that. But yeah, it's interesting because I had somebody ask, are they going to have to pay tax? Of course they're going to have to pay. Every Uber driver pays taxes. Like, that's not the hard part here.
They're already paying taxes.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and it's funny how everybody becomes a tax law expert when all this happens, because they're like, well, they need to start paying taxes on their tuition. Well, no. The tax code says that tuition, scholarship money that pays for tuition, is actually not taxable. They actually can be taxed now on their room and board. Just depends on whether they make enough money off of it to be taxed. So all of that stuff is already kind of baked in. Yeah. That part doesn't need to be figured out. What has to be figured out is, can you do this? And like you said, there have been a lot of entreaties to Congress. Now, this is the first one where it feels like the schools and some of the players are on the same side.
Yeah, and this is, I mean, we talk about these associations. They don't have all the power in the world, but it seems like one of the first times that they're all aligned. So you get the schools kind of aligned. You have the associations, and you definitely have some athletes too. So does Congress make? I mean, I wrote about this yesterday, Andy. We get a presidential election coming up. There's plenty of international affairs to take care of. Is Congress going to find time to make a move in the next 6 months? Like, I don't think so. I'm not saying it's the odds are just low. And I mean, Congress takes its recess in the summer and things like that. We'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, I will continue saying what I've been saying all along. Solve your own problems. Do not beg the federal government to tell you how to run your own business. But I understand if this is actually what everybody wants, you may need some help. Ryan says, I'm going to show my ignorance. Are there no Title IX issues? That's another kind of up in the air thing. We don't know. Like, and Title IX's changing. Like, we really don't know. And I think that's part of the other problem with this, Pete, is everybody wants a definitive answer. Yeah. There's so many balls in the air. Like the people we just talked about, the schools, the athletes, the organizations that represent the athletes, they can all want the same thing. They can all, let's say they all want collective bargaining, but the athletes aren't employees. But if the courts decide, if the NLRB and then by extension the courts decide that they are athletes, then they're employees, then they are employees, and you got to figure that out. You got to work with reality.
It. Yeah. I mean, and the other reason why the NCAA wants to go to Congress, and maybe I should have made this more clear, is they want the limited antitrust exemption, which basically gives them free reign to do whatever they want.
Except, as we discussed last week, even actual antitrust exemptions that exist now don't do that. So they're going to have to bargain with the athletes
at some point
and make deals. That's because what the reason they've not gotten any traction at all in Congress, or one of the reasons, I think the laundry list of things you just mentioned is a bigger part of it. But another reason they've not gotten any traction in Congress so far is previously the schools would go and say, well, here's what we want. And it's basically, please make the old system law so that we can make whatever, we can collude to make whatever rules we want and not have to ask the athletes about it, and stop all this athlete freedom. Well, Congress is not going to do that.
There's also something called politics, and Democrats and Republicans don't exactly agree on
don't always agree on things. And the other problem is, in this particular case, like there were things that Democrats and Republicans actually agreed upon that went against the schools, like because the schools essentially want a price fix. Republicans tend to like open markets.
Yep.
They ran into that with Justice Kavanaugh in the Supreme Court, realizing, oh, he's not going to help us. In fact, he hates us more than anyone. That's bad. So, there's
even some more divisive things too, right? Like Democrats want revenue sharing put in bills.
Yes.
Republicans aren't a fan of that. Most Republican bills have included language that would make sure athletes are not employees. Democrats aren't 100% behind that either. I mean, it's the odds are not high.
Yeah. But I will say this is the first thing that we've seen that looks like compromise. So I'd say that's a good sign. Whether it ends up in anything, from Congress that helps them reach that compromise, or if they just reach it on their own, at least they are starting to move together rather than just exist on these separate poles. Because until all this gets figured out, we don't know what, and this is like, I realize this is a very dry topic for most people, but it's not to me, because what happens next determines what everything looks like after this, like which teams are in the top division.
Yes.
I had a Texas State fan tweet at me yesterday, like, well, this doesn't help everybody in the FBS. I'm like, it's not supposed to help everybody in the FBS.
No.
It's supposed to help them comply with the law, and then everybody figures out what level of competition they need to be at.
There's a reason why sources continue to tell Andy and I that the Big Ten and the SEC would love to just have a 40-team super conference.
Yeah.
So,
and they already got, I'm bad at math, but they already got 34.
Yeah.
So that's
6 more.
The odds aren't ever in everybody's favor, unfortunately. So, and there will be a Hunger Games to get to the rest of that. But we're gonna find out, and pretty fast, what's gonna happen. So, well, Pete, I realize you've had a lot of fun in the spring transfer portal window. There are probably still some dominoes to fall,
a few,
but get ready for even more house settlement negotiation drama.
That should be fun. I'll talk to you soon. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Pete.
See you, Andy.
The great Pete Nakos. I don't think you should take your Nakosifications off your phone yet. I'm just going to tell you that right now. I think all this stuff, again, not the most juicy, sexy topic for internet discourse, but how this all breaks out and shakes out will give us a lot better idea of what it all looks like in a couple of years. And like I said, when they said we're going to do this playoff format from 2024 and 2025, and then 2026 we might be moving to something different, I said don't get wrapped up in that, because they may be moving to something different because everything looks different in 2026. The way things are moving, the speed at which things are moving, I do think that still remains a possibility, that things look pretty different. And in terms of, will they look dramatically different? Yeah, they could here in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. It's a matter of how they get to this, but it's happening so fast. This is one of those things that years ago, like in 2011, I wrote about how you could rewrite the NCAA rule book to pay the athletes. And essentially it was this system that they have now. And I was like, maybe by 2040, they'll get to something like that. No, it happened in 2021. And then when it happened in 2021, I was like, okay, well, clearly I didn't think this through, and they didn't think this through, because there's some glaring holes in this thing. And I thought, okay, but it's college sports. They won't get to the next thing until 2040, 2050. Nope. They're probably going to get to the next thing like 2026, 2027. And it's fast. So we'll just have to see how that shakes out. Those negotiations are ongoing. The plaintiffs in the House case have a ton of leverage right now. They're going to be able to extract a pretty big dollar figure, and the sooner the better for the NCAA, for the schools, because they've got to do something, because the price tag will go up if they wait too long. And that's always a very powerful motivation. One school that always has a very powerful motivation to win is LSU. The last 3 coaches before Brian Kelly won national championships. I think we could probably all agree that Nick Saban kind of unlocked the blueprint for LSU to be a consistent national power. And Brian Kelly in his first 2 years there, 10 games. First year SEC West title. They win 10 games last year. But last year, incredible offense, horrific defense. They lose a Heisman Trophy winner, 2 first-round receivers, but they have a quarterback waiting in the wings. But is the defense going to be any better? That is the question. So we talked about that with Billy Embody from On3's The Bengal Tiger. First, though, we had to clear up a very important pressing issue that is affecting the On3 community and the LSU community. We are joined now by Billy Embody of The Bengal Tiger, that is On3's LSU site. And Billy, we covered this on your show a couple weeks ago, but I want to anybody who needs to hear this, I want them to hear it. Because here at On3, we've had a little internal debate about what to call Garrett Nussmeier. J.D. Pickell, the esteemed J.D. Pickell, wants to call him the Gumbo Gunslinger. I'm not sure I can get behind that. First of all, Garrett grew up all over the place. Dad, Doug, was coaching at various stops around the country. So I realize the family is originally from Louisiana, but I'm not sure we're going to attach Gumbo to the man's name. And you on the message boards have, I believe, put this to rest among the LSU community.
Well, I think I got to give a lot of credit to our Bengal Tiger subscribers. They jumped kind of on JD a little bit there, fairly or unfairly. You know, JD's trying to help out Garrett build his brand. You know, NIL these days always need a little bit of extra there. But the Nuss bus has rolled around the country for quite some time now, throughout his childhood into his high school career. But it has stayed parked in the garage at LSU for the most part for the last few seasons, and now it's ready to get going on his SEC tour and becoming the starting quarterback at LSU. So the Nuss bus makes a lot of sense. There are a lot of people who have hopped on the Nuss bus train, and it's been rolling for quite some time. And, you know, I love Garrett. He doesn't seem like he's really packing in all the different ways you can have Gumbo either. So he is very much carrying the torch for LSU by way of the bus.
I like this. Plus, Eric Musselman has moved on to USC from Arkansas, so there is no Muss bus in the SEC, and you kind of need a new bus. So there's no Gus bus in the SEC anymore since Gus Malzahn got fired at Auburn. That is in the Big 12 now. So yeah, I mean, it has to be the Nuss bus. Good. I'm glad we settled that. I'm glad we got that taken care of. I feel like that's been hanging over our heads for a while. What else has been hanging over LSU's head? Oh, yeah. They had maybe one of the worst defenses in the history of college football last year. So how do they fix that? That's one thing we've talked about, but now post-spring practice, you've gotten a chance to see what the roster is going to look like. How do they get better defensively?
Now it's about finding the best available defensive tackles and just getting them on board. And look, there is a sort of a scholarship crunch in a way for LSU as they try to address this position that really needs 2 defensive tackles to come in and just give them good quality reps. And so there are still options out there. They need to work quickly before summer begins and these guys start to, you know, make those decisions. We've seen Dominic Williams, we've seen Simeon Barrow end up elsewhere. They've been linked to different guys throughout the spring portal window, but the reality is now it's about finding guys who can give you some snaps at 100%, and you have a complimentary guy next to him or coming off the bench who can give you snaps at 100%. And by way of quantity now, maybe that would make LSU's interior of their defensive line better. There's also a thought of moving Savion Jones, who's a defensive end inside, kind of bulking him up, maybe trying to figure that out. There's a lot of different ways they're going to have to address this, including walk-ons like Preston Hickey. They moved offensive lineman Kimo Makiniole over to the defensive line. They're just trying just about everything to make this work. But LSU, at this point, you missed on the big fish, Dominic Williams, Simeon Barrow. You got to go out and just address the position however you can with numbers. And maybe it's an Aiden Huntington from ULM who's gotten some good burn in the portal since entering. He was all Sun Belt. Maybe it's another player, but they have to just go out and, quite honestly, at this point, take whoever's got some starting experience and some production, no matter the level, and just bring them in and get them on board. The defensive line is first. The cornerback room would be the other.
Okay, well, before we get to the cornerback room, let's talk about the D tackle search in the portal, because obviously everybody needs him. We talked about Dominic Williams last week. It came down to really Texas and Oklahoma, and eventually it sounds like basically Texas said, too rich for our blood. Oklahoma said, no, we really need defensive tackles. Let's go. How hard is it to balance that? Because that's one thing that Pete Nakos and I talked about the other day is when you want to bring a guy in, you have to be careful because you have to watch what you have everybody else down for NIL wise. Because if you bring in somebody and that number's out of whack a little bit, you set the number out of whack for everybody else too, and then you have a problem.
And this is for lack of a better term, salary cap debate you have to have when you manage a roster. And LSU just probably couldn't get up to the number that Oklahoma ended up giving Dominic Williams, which I don't think it hit seven figures. Could be wrong. Don't know the exact number, but I know that was rumored at one point for Dominic Williams. All three teams in need of defensive tackles, and all three in the SEC. But when you look at what schools have to balance is when you need to address positions, do you go out and get, if you can, that tip-top blue chip type of transfer that is going to command a heavy six-figure NIL deal? Or do you go out and you say, okay, we've seen a guy like this or a guy like that start in spurts at a school or contribute for multiple years as a veteran? I look at some schools around the country that are bringing in quantity and a good enough level of quality to address positions and build depth, because especially along the defensive line, you can't just say we're going to bring in one player and it's going to fix our issue, because these big guys, with the way offenses are now these days, they move and they can tire those guys out. If you don't have somebody competent behind them to give you some reps, I mean, there are going to be opportunities for offenses to take advantage of that. So the balance to walk is, yes, you can make a splash. You can make your fan base happy by bringing in a Dominic Williams, a Simeon Barrow, some of these other guys from the winter portal window, but it would have helped LSU's defensive tackle issue. It might not have overall fixed it because they just don't have the depth overall. They brought in Sean Washington from Georgia. He still needs to develop. They've got some freshmen. They've got some other pieces, but they really need quantity until Bo Davis can address that position like he did in high school recruiting for Texas, and that takes time. And Brian Kelly.
Well, the other good thing about Bo Davis, though, is Bo Davis inherited Byron Murphy, inherited Tavondre Sweat, turned them into very good college defensive linemen, first and second round NFL draft pick. That probably helps too. I mean, he should be able to work with what's on the roster a little bit. But, you mentioned corner is another one. And this one baffles me a little bit, Billy. As somebody from the outside who spent basically decades watching LSU just plug in corner after corner after corner, always having somebody either ready or some true freshman who's ready to just pop in there and play. That was the most bizarre thing of the last 2 years, is watching them struggle at corner.
And this is where Brian Kelly took some time to adjust, along with his staff that he put in place for that LSU defensive staff. The floor, was so high for defensive backs when Corey Raymond was there, and continuing on that legacy of DBU, that when you missed, you really didn't miss badly on players. I mean, there were defensive backs that caught some grief at LSU for not being that level that they expect of a DBU.
Yeah, then they go start at Alabama.
Yeah, and exactly. They go, they don't pan out, and then they go start at Alabama, or they, what have you. It's now the floor with Corey Raymond being back can at least be built up to a level. But LSU for a while didn't take many corners that were under 6 foot. I mean, that was kind of Corey Raymond's MO. Was 6 foot long, can run, just need to add some weight to him. That was kind of what they looked for, and they hit on him, whether it was blue chip guys or whether it was developmental players. And so that floor and kind of that expectation recruiting wise just kind of went away for a couple years. And then you factor in missing on some portal takes like Denver Harris and a couple others, and then you're in a complete nightmare situation at corner. And even now, there's a lot of buzz around, PJ Woodland coming out of the spring as a true freshman, or moving on Michael Turner, who's a signee, to defensive back and letting him go. There's a lot of kind of hope, but not many of these guys really look like what we're used to seeing at corner for LSU. So they're going to have to prove some of us wrong.
Yeah, and that's it. It's interesting having Corey Raymond back because he definitely has a type that he goes and recruits. So, like what we just talked about, I can imagine our conversation a year from now sounding very different. The problem is they got us play some games in between now and then. Now, so what it sounds like is the offense may have to pick up the slack again for the defense. We talked about Garrett Nussmeier. It's weird because it is such an unusual circumstance now to have this sort of quarterback ascension where you have a pretty good player, he waits his turn behind another really good player, and then he winds up being the starter. That's how basically everyone worked in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. But now it's like seeing a unicorn.
Yeah, and it's a pretty cool story for Garrett Nussmeier. I mean, he does claim Louisiana as, being where he's from. Out of all the places he's lived, he leans into being LSU's quarterback, and he's very excited about it. And he's got a group of receivers that you have. Kyron Lacey coming back. He's talented. He was the third option last year. Can he be a true elite number one? We'll have to find that out. And he's got tools to be consistent and a good option for him. But that's why they went out and grabbed C.J. Daniels from Liberty, Xavion Thomas from Mississippi State. They've got a Chris Hilton, an Aaron Anderson, players like that coming back. And they have some freshmen who maybe could emerge, or redshirt freshmen, second-year guys that they could look to a little bit more as they try to find the right group, because C.J. Daniels is going to have to make that step up in competition from Liberty. And it's not an easy one, but he's productive. He looked good in the spring. You look at Xavion Thomas in a bad Mississippi State offense, was able to be productive on top of what he can do in the return game. And so they have some depth. They have some pieces. And it's probably going to require a little bit of feeling out when the lights come on in the games. But that's also why they've got to lean heavily on a Mason Taylor at tight end and some of these other options to step up as well, because this offense is just going to look a little different. And I mean, the running game should be improved, in my opinion, too, because they've got two good backs there as well.
Well, we had Cortez Hankton, the receivers coach from LSU, on the show a few weeks ago, and he was talking about, just how Chris Hilton and Kyron Lacey got to watch Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas and how they worked. Because I think we were having this conversation last year. We knew Malik Neighbors was good. We knew Brian Thomas was good, but I don't know that we would have said both of those guys are surefire first rounders this time last year. So there is room for development. And I'm with you on CJ Daniels. That's a guy who was very productive at Liberty. You talk to the people at Liberty, they seem to think that he's going to be able to make that transition fairly easily. Yeah.
And I think I remember Brian Thomas coming out of high school, and I said to one of my friends or one of our subscribers, I said, he's either going to be a first round pick and going to wow everybody, or he's just going to be a complete bust and, kind of end up, just kind of withering away at LSU or moving on. And boy, he obviously boomed big time and ended up being a first round pick. Malik kind of had that competitiveness from the get-go that you said, okay, if they can continue to find ways to get Jaden Daniels to push the ball down the field, he's going to make plays. And so we saw those flashes. There was a little bit more, and I don't want to say there's not hope going into this year by any means, but there was a little bit more hope that that would happen and thought that it would with those two receivers, as well as Kyron Lacy being that third option. This year, you have two new guys coming in. You have Kyron Lacy coming back, who battled some drops early in his career. It's a different way of putting together this group of receivers. I mean, you look at Kyron Lacy being a transfer, Xavier Thomas, CJ Daniels. It's not as much homegrown LSU talent. They're honestly, outside of Chris Hilton, you look at the top 5 on paper, they're all transfers. So it's a little bit of a different way of putting it together for LSU this year. Doesn't mean it can't be successful, but it just seems like as far as pure game breakers, they have some guys that have that potential, but they need to just show it a little bit more.
Well, and you mentioned the running game, and we've talked about LSU's offensive line. You know, when Cody Blair and I did our ultimate teams, I had Will Campbell on mine. He drafted Emory Jones on his. Garrett Dellinger, their left guard, is a guy who started with them for the past 2 years. He'll be a third-year starter as well. It feels like this is a group that can – we know they can protect the passer, but it feels like they also should be able to open some holes in the run game. And, you know, I realize this sounds like nostalgia almost, but like, remember when LSU always had 2 or 3 great backs and could just ram the ball down your throat? Like, is it possible that they move back a little bit toward that?
Yeah, I think Frank Wilson is doing a really good job recruiting that position. And we kind of saw kind of that COVID time, some of the freshmen off that 2019 team, like a John Emery, 4 or 5-star, didn't pan out. They took Armani Goodwin from Alabama at one point, and he had some promise, but battled injuries. They had different backs that all could do different things and showed flashes at times, but could never be consistent. Now it seems like Frank Wilson has that room, at least quality-wise, on a very good level. They don't have much depth this season, it seems, but I was talking about it on another podcast. I'm really high on what this run game could do. I mean, Caleb Jackson has a chance to really break out this year, and Josh Williams is a steady veteran. If Caden Durham could come in and give them some good snaps, they will have a chance to have one of the best backfields in the SEC, in my opinion, because they also have that offensive line who does return 4 starters, but also DJ Chester, the center. I mean, a lot of people think it's going to be addition by subtraction, and it's not as much of a slight to Charles Turner, the outgoing center, as much as it is that DJ Chester is that well thought of by many people around LSU's building. So I'm really excited about DJ Chester. I remember seeing him as a high school player. We played tackle. We showed the athleticism. When you plug him into the middle and you've got all those veterans around you, it might end up working out even better than LSU realized in that sense as they put together this group through the years that is now, I mean, they're going to have a lot of work to do for the 2025 offensive line, but enjoy this 2024 group because they're all really, really good.
Well, and that's the thing. It feels like this is now you have to capitalize. It's so rare to be able to have this type of veteran presence on your offensive line, this much accomplishment already. Like guys that have played, they're good. This is as experienced as they're going to be while they're playing for you. Like that's as good as it gets. But what is the realistic expectation for LSU? Like what among the LSU fan base, like the folks on your message board, what do they feel like is the ceiling for this team?
I mean, the expectation obviously is to be, competing
national championship,
national championship, getting there. I mean, the only higher expectations around LSU are for the baseball team. And so, I mean, right or wrong, that's just the reality of it. But LSU has a team that if they can be coached up better, and we talked about that with Bo Davis, coaching up that group at Texas on the defensive line. Blake Baker is obviously taking over as defensive coordinator, and they've got a really good staff on that side of the ball. If just schematically and putting it together better and more organized can help them improve into the, let's say, the 70s of college football defenses, that would be a win. And then it's about the offense holding up its end of the bargain that they have, the last year especially. But even when Jaden Daniels was still kind of learning as LSU's first-year starter, they were showing some flash and some promise and had some good games as well. But you could see this team honestly going anywhere from 8 wins to running the table. I mean, look at how close they were last year to doing it with a historically bad defense. And that is so hard to do. I mean, and LSU fans kind of got a taste of what, an A&M with Johnny Manziel or a Patrick Mahomes, Texas Tech. I mean, that's them having to score so many points to have a chance, and they still won 10 games. So Brian Kelly has a good floor for this program year in, year out because of how he prepares his team 6 days of the week leading up to Saturday. I mean, he has an analytical approach. He has a good feel for his team, and you see them be able to capture some big wins. You also have, seen them miss out on having really, really good teams because of some things that, whether you can pin it on Brian Kelly because he's in year 3, or whether you can, in certain instances, look back at the past and say they're in this position because of all the things prior to Brian Kelly arriving. It's been such a fluid rebuild. Each spot has, okay, they got to go out and address quarterback. All right, bring in Jaden Daniels. Check. All right, offensive line. Wow, Brad Davis has really made that better. But defense, it just didn't work out. After hitting on their transfers year 1 the way they did, it kind of blew the expectations even out of the water for years 2, year 3, years 4, where they didn't have the same luck in year 2 hitting on defensive transfers. And so we saw that defense suffer because of it. And now they're in the same position of trying to rebuild that defense. And there are certain spots that they've been able to continue to develop with guys that they already have, but they also have not gotten to the point where they're feeling comfortable yet with other positions because it still takes years to rebuild the way Brian Kelly would prefer to, which is really through the high school ranks.
Well, so LSU, if you go to FanDuel, the odds to make the college football playoff, to be in the 12-team field, yes is plus 116, no is minus 142. So we're essentially talking even money, kind of almost even money, 50-50 proposition. And I think that's about right because like you said, and it's interesting to use the word rebuild because I think most programs, when they use the word rebuild, are not thinking along the lines of double-digit wins and division championships. And LSU has a division championship and 2 double-digit win seasons during this quote-unquote rebuild. So, yeah, I am fascinated to see how this winds up because it really bounced the ball one way here or the other. I go back to last year, the Ole Miss game could have been an LSU win very easily. The Missouri game could have been an LSU loss very easily. And so that's kind of how it's probably going to go in this year.
Yeah, and who knows? I mean, USC is a wild card. UCLA has a new coaching staff. You've got to take care of business in those type of games. But ultimately, I mean, let's say they go through growing pains and they're figuring out a new defense, or Garrett Nussmeier is not playing as well as he can. Then you look to the SEC slate, and it's really not that bad, in my opinion, at South Carolina.
Nah, it could be worse.
It could be a lot worse. And LSU has to capitalize on the games they obviously should win. And then they've got to capitalize on their home games. I mean, Ole Miss, Alabama, Oklahoma stand out to me. But then you look at their road games at Arkansas. I mean, a lot of people saying Sam Pittman could be on the way out after this year. At A&M, brand new coaching staff, who knows? Billy Napier, probably a must-win game in the swamp for him. And then you've got Vandy and South Carolina in there. I mean, it's a manageable schedule for LSU. Yeah. And that's where you've got to capitalize, and you've got to find a way to get to Atlanta.
All you need to know about the back end of that Florida schedule is LSU coming to town might be the most winnable game. Oh. And that's not a slight to LSU. Billy, it is going to be so much fun to watch this rebuild. Yeah. Double-digit win rebuild.
Hopefully for the Bengal Tiger message board, it's going to be some fun.
Thank you, Billy.
Anytime. Thanks for having me.
That is Billy Embody talking LSU Tigers. And we put a poll up. Will LSU make the playoff? Right now, running 53% no, 47% yes. Very similar to our Penn State poll yesterday, where it just sort of slightly veered toward the negative, but was basically a 50-50 proposition. So this brings us to the topic of tomorrow's show. We're going to have a series of ceiling and floor evaluations. We're going to tell you what is your team's ceiling, what is your team's floor. We're going to do it conference by conference, power conference by power conference. Me and Cody Belair, On3's National Scout, we start tomorrow with the SEC. So we'll say Tennessee. What is Tennessee's ceiling? What is Tennessee's floor? And we will examine that. And I'm fascinated to see where we wind up with this because, look, everybody's ceiling isn't going to be the playoff, but I imagine when we're doing the SEC and the Big Ten, we're going to have a lot of teams with a ceiling of playoff. I imagine we do the Big 12. We'll have a lot of teams with a ceiling of playoff because they're all fairly evenly matched, and the team that wins the Big 12 is going to the playoff. So it's going to be a very different discussion than if we'd had it 2-3 years ago. But it's going to be fascinating. We're going to dive into schedules, dive into rosters, dive into schemes. This will be so much fun. It starts tomorrow with the SEC, and we will see you at 8 a.m. Eastern Time tomorrow.